let's just make sure we're live here. Well, thanks everyone for joining today, and welcome back to Out of the Weeds Live. My name is Nish Sampath, and I'm the founder of Switch Advisory. And this is a show for founders who want to build a business that runs without them, and one day maybe even sell it for what it's actually worth. So here's something most founders get wrong about selling. They think about the selling process as being a financial event or a legal event. So they clean up the books, they hire the lawyer, and the whole time, one of the biggest things that decides whether the deal closes at full value is sitting beside them at the desk. It's the people. It's the key person risk and whether your team stays after the deal is done. And the challenge is that none of that gets fixed in the 30 days before you get a term sheet. It has to start a lot earlier. So today, we're going to talk about the people side of a sale, the part founders manage last and a buyer looks at first. And I could not have a better guest. Welcome, Vered. Vered is the founder and CEO of Vimy HR, a fractional HR firm that supports the kind of founder-led businesses we talk about on the show. Welcome, Vered. Amazing to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So my name is Vered Levant, and obviously, thanks for the intro. So I spent over a decade in corporate HR, working really as a business partner. And after I left 10 years later, I saw that there was kind of a gap in the market. A lot of HR consulting firms, so really focusing on the strategy, handing over deliverables, but no one on the HR operations side actually embedded in the business, helping small businesses, and saw that as a strategic lever. When I started 10 years ago, I think a lot of small businesses still saw it as a cost center. We're seeing a wave of change in that mindset. And yeah, we function as an operations team. So we do obviously support strategy and thinking proactively about helping organizations scale and setting them up for success for sale, but also supporting them on the execution side.
I love it. And obviously, you and I have partnered with clients, and we love the Vimy team. So very, very happy to have you here. So let's get into it. So obviously there are HR implications for a sale, which extend from, pre-sale, during the process, and then after the sale even happens. Through all of that, what are the major blind spots and challenges that a founder often never even considers on the HR side that impacts that deal?
Yeah. So there's many things to think about when you're considering a sale. And I'm sure this has been brought up on your show many times, but you have to be proactive. It's not going to happen overnight. And people are sticky. Change is hard. And so the sooner you can start preparing for that sale, the better, especially on the people side. And so there's one thing about like mitigating risk and having the policies and all that stuff in place, um, and building the infrastructure to document what people do, drive accountability, like all of those sort of system pieces that obviously we develop within Vimy HR for our clients, but you need time to practice those things. So it's one thing to say, "Hey, Joe, here's your job description and all your responsibilities," but you have to take the time to look at that shift, and is Joe actually doing what he needs to do? Where are the gaps? And let's course correct, or let's tweak the system. And the same thing happens on the founder side. So taking the time to make sure that the business can operate without you. And how do you do that? So it's starting to delegate some of those responsibilities that rely on you from an operational standpoint, but then step away, take a 2-week vacation, see what happens, and then see what needs to be addressed when you get back.
I love that 2-week test is kind of our litmus test. So when we're going in and we're checking around, founder dependency and how much of an implication negatively it is within the organization, we say, can you take 2 weeks off and not look at your phone and actually trust that the organization is going to continue to operate effectively, that people and clients are going to be happy, and that you're not going to have to put out a whole bunch of fires when you get back home.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can document everything, but it's the decision making, it's the nuanced things around behaviors and really the cultural fabric that need to be monitored.
I, I mean, incredible, right? Like that's exactly it. It's like we like to term it. It's a muscle that has to be exercised. You can't just
Exactly.
do it once and assume everything is going to be great and you're going to be super strong. You have to continuously go in and work that muscle. And I think that cultural muscle is pretty important. Can you tell me a little bit more? Like when you're going into these organizations, what are some of the things from a cultural perspective that you can do to sharpen the organization so that
Yeah.
you're they have that resilience?
Yeah. So I've seen so many times where we walk into an organization, they go, "Oh, yeah, well, we don't have a people problem. No, everything's fine."
Hmm.
And we start having conversations, in particular with the leadership team, and realize, oh, actually, they're not all on the same page. They're not aligned. They don't know what the founder's thinking in their head of where they want to take the business, what that's actually going to look and feel like for everyone. So those are some of the things that we start to create a common language for. So, I mean, it sounds fluffy, but it's foundational and it's the anchor. But looking at the purpose and values, right, and making
Hmm.
sure that they're interwoven into the system that we develop, because that common language is going to create the right behaviors to create the culture. So it's one thing to have values on a piece of paper, but what's like the living system that is in place in the organization? And you can, create the standards, the operating procedures, but the how of how those things are done is the cultural piece and that common language that needs to be developed and be
Yeah,
intentional and reinforced.
I think that's wonderful. I think, if I'm honest, I used to think values were fluff too until I really got into it and understood the implications to the organization and how critical it is to make sure you're aligned not just with your employees from a cultural perspective, but even your clients, your partners, your entire ecosystem. Can you give me an example, just as a little bit of an aside, like how do you exercise values within the organization? How do you make sure it becomes part of the fabric?
Reinforcement and also making decisions based on those values. So, Susie could have all the competencies of her job in place, but she's not living the values. She's not a team player, if that's one of your values. She's not collaborative. Um, she doesn't work in a way that's honest. So that's disruptive to your team, to your organization. But we see it in organizations all the time, especially large ones where that you don't have line of sight to those daily behaviors. And the focus is on someone that's really good at their job. So let's promote them.
Yeah,
And it creates chaos. And as you know, in a small business, that's just a non negotiable because every body counts. So that becomes amplified and it needs to be addressed right away. And that's how critical values are in terms of making sure that you have the right culture in place and you need to be attuned to the behaviors of everyone on your team.
yeah. I think I was having a conversation with some clients just the other day, and we were talking about somebody who wasn't the right fit, and we knew they weren't the right fit anymore for the organization. Frankly, the alignment had been pretty clear for quite a long time, but there was that fear if we let them go, what happens to the rest of the organization? And I frame it almost like it's a cancer, and that cancer unfortunately spreads if we allow it to stay within the body. So sometimes you have to make those hard decisions and cut that cancer out as quickly and effectively as we need to.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know that, in small businesses, what we try to do in our line of work is minimize chaos. You know,
Hmm.
as much as the business can just flow because there's this sort of natural rhythm that's created, the better. And profitability increases. So not addressing those behavioral issues creates chaos and ultimately will affect profitability.
I think that's the strongest tie. People don't often consider the direct line from, you know, strong culture to strong profit, right? But we see it every time where organizations are thriving, right? The people are working hard, they're happy, they're excited, right? Their positive energy is flowing throughout the organization, and it has implications to the top line, to the bottom line. It is truly seen within the organization, and vice versa. The opposite is totally true as well.
Mhm.
Let's jump into, like, when a buyer is first approaching an organization, what are some of the HR questions they're asking right up front?
Yeah, I mean, again, you're looking at, can the business run without the founder
Hmm.
sticking their fingers into operations on a daily basis? Does the business rely on one person? So we've walked into new engagements, and maybe the founder isn't the key person anymore, and the business can run without them, but maybe their operations person has all of this institutional knowledge. They've been raised in the organization,
Hmm.
and they haven't really delegated or let go of some of their functions. So you put your organization at risk, and it really isn't of value if those, the things that create the company are all in one person's mind.
Totally. Couldn't agree
Mhm.
more. Um, let's continue with that key person, key retention. Obviously, at Switch, when we're guiding clients towards that sale, our focus is significantly to decrease that founder dependency. That's critical for that and for the health of the organization and for that founder CEO to actually be able to sell and leave at some point versus having to go along for the ride for 5+ years. You know, from your perspective, obviously, I would say that key man risk goes beyond that single founder potentially. How do you take that risk in consideration? Like, how do you keep critical people through a process that you can't even fully talk about yet?
There is a level of transparency that you can have, and I would say get ahead of it, because people can feel it, especially in a smaller business,
Hmm.
because they're going to see new people in the office, the founder that's in meetings all the time with strange people, right? And people talk. And so I think there is a level of transparency that needs to happen. And you also need to nurture what you have. And by that, I mean telling your team that this would not have happened without them, and that there's a future. You're doing this to support continued growth, and letting your team know who is critical. If it's your leadership team, you got to work on that first and build, you know, that that transparency with them, and then also help them create communication to their team. So yeah, I think that there is some level of proactivity, and you have to be as transparent as you can be around what's happening, but also minimize the risk of flight. Um, and then the other piece that I've seen a lot too with some of our clients is, again, like that key person, and they don't want to let go, but I think that there's also an opportunity to say, hey, you've created a lot of growth for this company, and
Right.
we want to increase that, we want to multiply that. So how are we going to do that together?
Yeah. So taking for the ride, along for the ride, essentially
Hmm.
with you. So let's dig into that a bit more because, before we dig into like infrastructure, contracts, bonus plans, and how you can actually retain those employees, there's that human side that we kind of scratched on, which is, again, most of the time, the team itself has little to no idea that leadership is considering a sale, especially if we're looking like, we're starting that process and maybe we're 18 to 24 months out before something actually happens. The sale process often takes longer than we perceive it to be. How does communication and timing impact morale, and how do you protect the team from that, again, from that FUD, that fear, uncertainty, and doubt that can bleed in and kill some of the morale when they are seeing people taking, silent meetings and just wondering what's happening within the organization.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't understand that process, and a lot of the times it's maybe even just walking them through what typically happens in a sale so that they're
Mhm.
prepared, because it's the fear of the unknown. Um, so it's the education piece. So if you can let your team know, like, this is what we're doing and this is what we're looking at, and as much as we can maintain what we've been doing, the better for
Mhm.
everyone. And so how are we going to do that together? So again, it's like bringing them in to solve the problem with you. They're a part of it.
And how far down the organization does that go? Is that just with the leadership team, or is there a sequencing that you would suggest depending on, hey, we're stage one is maybe we're thinking about a sale. We're going to explore the opportunity. Is that the time to bring somebody in, or is it towards like, hey, we have an LOI on the table and there's some real possibility that this will move forward?
Yeah, I think again, you have to manage change well and you have to be intentional about it. And that's all about utilizing the resources that you have and creating some level of awareness first and getting buy in to the
Hmm.
shift. So I would always say bringing your leadership team first. They're the ones, if an organization is working well, they have the closest relationship with their team members. And so, and to get their buy in, you have to bring them into the fold so that they can use their own words and strategize with you on how you're going to communicate that and what that flow is going to look like and how you're going to bring people along, because it's step by step.
And I think that's critical too, because when you think about it, you shouldn't be, if I'm the founder, I shouldn't be the sole person having the conversation with potential buyers, right? That shows, again, that founder dependency that is potentially way too high and way too strong. And what you would want to show is more of an equal footing across your leadership team where other people have the knowledge, they have clarity on the strategy, they have clear accountabilities within the organization. So not everything relies on one person. All of the core risks from a sale perspective, even from client relationships, they're not just owned by a single human being. Fires don't
Mhm.
go to one person to get put out, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to demonstrate that through the sale process. So no better way than, frankly, bringing your leadership team along for the ride, having that conversation clearly.
Absolutely. And as a founder, if you did things right, you're going to have some blind spots too. You don't
Hmm.
know every corner of your company anymore.
Hopefully, right? That's
Hopefully.
that's the ambition. Have you seen it blow up anywhere where people have simply didn't done it wrong? Like there was some poor communication that led to some folks within the organization just leading through stress.
Oh yeah, I've seen it so many times, right? Where you've decided that the focus is elsewhere and it's
Hmm.
not across what actually makes you money, which is your people.
Right.
Um, so no, you have to look at it as a holistic system of change, and it's not only just the sale, but like thinking of the implications on your team. And if you're not doing that, you're not being sensitive to that piece of it. Yeah, people are going to leave. And again, that creates chaos. So, everything that we do is really trying to minimize that chaos. And it's not just about like in the moment, it's being proactive around it.
Right. And so before we kind of go back into that retention conversation, when a deal does close, are there tools and strategies that you can use to make sure that the culture actually survives with the new owner?
Oh, that's a hard one because you're a lot of the values work that we do lives with the owner.
Hmm.
It comes from them. They're the reason that the organization was created. So, as much as possible, I mean, if you have that structure developed and it's woven into the fabric of it, um, yes, you can
Hmm.
maintain it because people are kind of living in this ecosystem that's already well developed. However, I mean, it has to be led by a leadership team. If you're going to have a sale and you have a founder who doesn't have that mindset of letting go and believing that the system works, and they want to blow everything up. That's what disrupts the culture.
So maybe it's a little bit about finding the right buyer, right? Buyers that are kind of aligned with the organization and um, want to keep that future vision potentially intact, but add some horsepower behind it, right? That's generally the ambition behind a sale. Is we're not just letting this go, but hopefully the next owners can grow it further, right?
Hmm.
But are they aligned with our culture? Are they aligned with the vision that this team has been pushing towards? Can they be additive to the organization as a whole?
Absolutely. And that brings up a really good point. We talked about, sorry, I just had a total, it just escaped me, but I think it was just going back to one of our previous points. If you have a founder that actually cares about their people and they're proactive around developing that culture, they're also going to be intentional about who they're looking for as a buyer. And so when you're talking about the communication piece of the sale to the rest of your team, that is one thing that you can talk about is I've spent all this time as a founder to develop this culture and invested in the people infrastructure. And I'm going to be very intentional about finding a buyer that is also invested with that same mindset.
Yeah, I think that's critical. Have you, as you take an organization through this and you're working with a founder, obviously it's an emotional process for them, right? They're trying to sell the thing they built, right, from scratch, their baby. Um, but they also have the everyday responsibility to lead their people, and they got to hold both of these things. How do you coach these founders to make sure they're thinking about the future but not letting it go about current present, they're humans, and making sure that all of their energy doesn't get diverted?
Yeah, I think it's really tricky as a founder. As you know, there is so much emotion involved in growing a company and trying to let it go. Um, and so, I think in that process, and maybe this is the part that also takes time, is when you are starting to let go, is where else are you spending your time? And what are the other things are you doing in your personal life to fill the other buckets?
Mm,
um, because the reality is even if you're not thinking of building a company to sell it in 5 years time, um, there is going to be a time where you have to retire. And you know thinking about like how you're going to do that, is it going to be your son or daughter that takes it over? There's still that emotional piece. And so, building that plan, that life plan of what you're going to do with that time helps you release the emotion from it. And the other thing is, again, like back to your point around finding the right buyer, I think it's less emotional when you know that it's going to be in good hands.
hmm Yeah. And what we've seen being very successful is, frankly, bringing in outside advisors, right? So whether it's HR advisors, coaches, fractional COOs from Switch, whatever that looks like, it's having that, third party be able to hold your hand through some of that because it is a very emotional process and you're trying to figure out what's right for you in the organization that you've built. You're trying to let go, but at the same time, you're not necessarily ready to give up control fully. And so it's that gentle release that you have to work through.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we work with quite a few family run businesses, and at the point that they're ready to release it to the next generation is a lot of the times when we come in, because they want it to be, they want their son or daughter or nephew to be supported, leave it in a good state for them, and they want them to be successful, and they want the
Right.
business to be successful. It's their legacy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's go back to that key man risk, that retention risk, because, especially, for example, if earnouts depend on the team staying, right? How do you retain those employees? How do you make sure maybe the right provisions are in place or tools to incent employees to stay? What are some of the tools that you've seen being used before?
Yeah, I'm not going to jump to incentives right away because the reality is we all know the stats. People don't stay because of money, right?
Mm,
If you really hate your job, but you're paid so much money, um, it's not going to help you perform your best or stay. And
totally.
so, really, the first point is how do you retain what already exists?
Right.
And so, again, it's thinking about like that cultural fabric. How do you maintain that? How do you retain it? How do you continue to work as is, or increase that level of efficiency and morale? So that's always the kind of the first point is how do you optimize the culture and the
Which
performance?
starts like years beforehand, right? Do we have the right people in the right seats? Do they have clear accountabilities so they actually know what a win is, right? And they're not fighting in a completely different direction than what you perceive the win to be for that
Mhm.
role. Does that individual get it, want it, and have the capacity to do the role that you want? Do they have clarity on the overarching vision for the organization? And are they aligned with that vision, or do they have a completely different perspective? Are there roles, do they have processes that are clear and right technology and things are measured? And again, back to I actually know what a win is in my role. It's probably the biggest challenge we ever see.
Yep. Yeah. So always clarity first, and
Yeah.
then communication, and then you can go to incentives. But if people don't know what they're supposed to be doing, you haven't communicated what's happening in the organization and that you're looking for sale and how they're a part of it,
Right.
how do you incentivize them properly?
Totally fair. So when we're thinking like, you know, pre-planning several years back or earlier, what is some of the infrastructure that we do need to put in place to make sure that things are going to be solid and a buyer is going to have the confidence through that sale process, that the HR element is strong and functional?
Yeah, it's actually, I'm going to do a little pitch about our strategic support model, but that's what we develop. Oftentimes, we're
Mm-hmm.
walking into organizations that don't have any infrastructure. So,
Right.
we're mitigating risk right away, developing policies, documenting procedures, so recruitment, onboarding, common language developed, and looking at automating a lot of their HR daily activities, um, performance management, how promotion decisions are made, all of that stuff
Mm.
needs to be built out. And then once that's done, which usually takes 12 to 18 months in a lot of our engagements, then it's about reinforcement. It's about maintaining what exists and making sure that um, people are able to move forward in using that system.
Absolutely. I all the time we go into organizations where those processes you talked about are simply not formalized, right? Some, usually the founder, one individual, is kind of coming up with these, trying them out, but we haven't really written anything down and we haven't exercised the muscle, and the paperwork and the rhythm hasn't been built into the fabric of the organization. So we're just about out of time, but if a founder's watching and they're, let's say, 24 months out from a potential sale, what's the one thing you would advise them to start looking at tomorrow?
Yeah, have they mitigated risk? Right? So, does everybody know what they're supposed to be doing, what the rules of engagement are in the organization? Um, does everybody know what they're supposed to be doing in their role and what their accountabilities are and what they're not accountable for? And
Right.
is everyone else aware of what each other is responsible for? Because that's really important. It's one thing just have a job description, but you have to communicate across the board of who's doing what and how they connect together. So those are some of the key things that I would take a look at and making sure that um, you have coverage of those
Mm.
responsibilities too.
Yeah, I think back to the founder dependency, key man risk element. Like, do you have redundancy built in? If someone goes on a vacation, does everything kind of come to a grinding halt?
Yeah, exactly.
Vered, this has been awesome. Thank you so much. It's definitely the kind of information business owners need to have to make some of those informed decisions, especially on the HR side. So if anybody's watching, you can connect with Vered either on LinkedIn or reach out through the Vimy HR website. Genuinely appreciate you being here today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Nish.
Take care.
You too.